Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. And so today we want to remind you it's the end of the year end giving. If you want to participate, support what we're doing every single week, please visit our page there at our donation page. We'll see it at the bottom. Also, please go to our YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe, and share those videos with everyone you can. We think what we share every week is so important. There's so much good stuff here. And so wherever you're joining us, again, we want to say thank you for joining. Welcome. This is going to be fun. And so we as a group, we continue moving through the book of Genesis. And again, we understand the book of Genesis is packed. It is just ripe with so much beauty. And there's so much beauty, so much metaphor, so much poetry. It's just packed with so much application for today. And so we remind ourselves every time we read, we want to know who this was originally intended for. And so, of course, we understand 587 BC, these Israelite people, this is a small tribe. We have this idea that this was like some huge tribe of people, millions of people, blah blah blah. No, this is a very tiny tribe, right? Middle Eastern tribe of people who, again, every large empire that comes through, like the other smaller tribes, they get taken over, right? They often will have to assimilate to the cultures that essentially take them captive. And so what happens with them is Babylon comes through, their temple's destroyed by the Babylonians, their whole system is turned upside down, marched hundreds of miles on foot to the city there in Babylon. And there in Babylon, they are essentially faced with this very real realization that they could potentially lose their culture. They've already lost their home, but they could potentially lose their entire way of life. And so what they do in response to this fear of what we call assimilation is that they write Torah, right? They compile all the stories, all the poetry, they compile all of it, not to write a perfect history. They compile it all so that they might remember their values, they might remember their rituals. They basically remember what it means to be a Jew, because being a Jew is not what oftentimes many of us will think of like when we think of our religious tribes. Being a Jew was a way of life. And so for them, they didn't want to give up what it meant to be a Jew, right? Because that was their life. That was who they were deep in their DNA. And they didn't want to give that up. And so they did not want to assimilate. And so what they did is they compiled Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They compiled all of it into what we have known as Torah. And this is why when they talk about Torah, Torah is the gift from God. It is the thing for them that encapsulates everything of what it means to really be a human. And so they have Torah, this beautiful gift. And again, Torah is a compilation of poetry, song, mythology, prophetic warnings, right? If you do this thing again, this will happen. We've been there. We've seen the cycle. It's all of that, right? Sometimes there's a story that ends up being a bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger story. We call those fish stories, right? They get bigger and bigger and bigger. There's embellishments. That's what it is, right? And it's beautiful. It's filled with so much beauty. And so Torah is a complete narrative of Israel miniaturized. So again, I tell my readers every single time, every time you read Torah, remember every character, every story has a purpose. And the purpose again is, who are we as Israelites? Where are we going? What kind of warning or promise is there for them? And what we can do as a people then, reading this thousands of years later in the 21st century, what we can do is we can say, beautiful. Now let's apply it to our lives today. Even though this book was not intended for me and you. It was intended for a very present audience then. But we have been lucky enough to take these writings and say, what can we do with these? How can we live these today? Right? And this is where, again, the Jesus narrative, the gospel messages, they are so beautiful, so filled with so much meaning and purpose. That's why we continue to read it. So all of that said, today we look at Genesis chapter 8. Genesis chapter 8. And we start with reminding ourselves Noah, right? Noah is the main character here. He is the one that is like the messianic archetype figure, right? He's the one that's going to bring Israel in the middle of all the chaos. He's going to lead Israel into an escape, right? An exodus from the chaos. And in order to get to the exodus from the chaos, they have to step into the ark, right? The basket, the thing that's going to hold safely Israel there. It's going to keep Israel safe. It's going to it's going to lead them away from captivity, right? Beastly empire. That's the bigger picture here of the ark. And so Noah again is the word here means rest. It means this place where again we get away from the chaos, right? It brings order. This is Noah. So let me read to you Genesis 8, 1 through 6. Here we go. And God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark. And God caused a spirit to pass over the earth. Again, this idea Passover. It's the same word, the same concept that you will see in the Exodus story when God passes over, right? God's breath, his spirit passes over, right? So again, you have this concept. You'll find it over and over again in the Torah. Caused a spirit to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. And the springs of the deep were closed, and the windows of the heavens, and the rain from the heavens was withheld. And the waters receded off the earth more and more. And the waters diminished at the end of the 150 days. And the ark came to rest in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, and on the mountains of Ararat. And the waters constantly diminished until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st of the month, the mountain peaks appeared. And it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made. And so again, the story goes, the flood happened. They sustained life inside the ark, right? They got through the chaos. The window has been opened. Everything is revealed. New life is now there on the other side, right? They've moved through it. And now we're about to begin ordering life again. But before we order life, there's some interesting things to consider. And this is what this chapter, and really verses 1 through 6, is going to capture. What do we do before we begin immediately ordering life again? Well, here's what the Israelites do. Notice this. And God remembered. God remembered. This word remembered. There have been Torah scholars who have written books, thick books on just this word remember. Because to be a Jew is to remember your story. Remember your value. Remember your identity. Remember. And so it's no wonder that their God remembers, right? Remember. So the question, of course, would be this. For many people who are going to literalize the story, if God remembered, did that mean he forgot? Right? Did he just forget? Oh, right, I got these people in this ark. I should probably take care of them. It gets a little bit weird, right, when you begin to literalize everything. But look deeper. Again, there's always something deeper going on. This word remember should, as a Jew and as anyone reading Torah seriously, when you hear remember, you're going to remember this concept of remembering is actually part of a larger collection of stories. It's part of a larger narrative. So watch me. Remember, thus it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the valley, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out to the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. So again, here's the story of Abraham and Lot. Did God forget about Abraham? Oh, right, there's Abraham. No, that's not the point here, right? The idea here is there's going to be some chaos in a minute, right? And we'll get to this story at some point soon. But again, Lot and Abraham, there's about to be chaos again. The world's fallen into disarray. There's going to be chaos. And God says, I remember Abraham. And we'll get to the concept of remember even deeper. But again, larger collection. Remember is to, as a Jew, you immediately begin thinking, oh yeah, Abraham and Lot. God remembered Abraham. Notice this, and God remembered Rachel, and God gave heed to her and opened her womb. Jacob and Rachel, he remembered the promise, right? That's a big deal if you are a Jewish person. He remembered the promise, the covenant, I will give you a child. Your lineage will continue on. And again, think about where Israel is right now as they're compiling these stories. They're wondering, is there a future for our generations? Right? Is the world going to be in total disarray? Will our people die here in Babylon? And the promise is no, they won't die here. Your lineage will continue on. That is my promise to you, right? And so God will remember. Beautiful. Another place. Then they arose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord and returned again to their house of Ramah and Elikah and relations with Hannah, his wife. And the Lord remembered her again. This idea of lineage, you will bear a child, right? You will bear a child, and from that child there will be life for Israel. And again, you get into these messianic archetypes. From this lineage, there will be more and more different individuals who are going to carry on the tradition of what it means to be a Jew, and God will remember the promise made to you. Another one, he remembered his holy word with Abraham, his servant. Again, remember Moses, right? God remembered Moses over and over again. You're going to see the concept of remember, because in the middle of your captivity, you are not forgotten. You are not forgotten. I think sometimes that's a beautiful message for many of us, right? You matter, right? Let that sink in for a minute. You matter. In the middle of your pain, in the middle of your brokenness, you matter. You are not forgotten, right? It's a beautiful, beautiful message. You matter. I have high school students that I meet with daily, and every day I am given this opportunity to tell them, you matter. Even though maybe your parents, even though maybe culture and society, whatever, have said you don't matter, I want you to know you matter. You are not forgotten. And this is the deep message for Israel in the middle of Babylonian captivity, where they feel like maybe they don't matter, where they feel like maybe they have been completely forsaken, right? My God, why have you forsaken me? The psalmist says, right? And Jesus will echo later on, right? I feel forgotten. I feel forgotten. And the response the Hebrews get from their God is, I remember. I remember. Think about this. We do memorials, don't we? Every ancient culture has done it. We have these memorials, and the reason we have memorials, whether you agree, disagree with certain memorials, that's on you, right? But the idea here, memorials are set up so that we acknowledge the person, the system, the place, the event. We look back, we stop, and we remember the thing. We take note of the thing. Often there is something to be learned from the thing, so we don't repeat the thing. Or maybe we do repeat certain characters and heroic elements. Whatever that is, memorials are set up so that we remember. And this is why Israel, over and over again, they will set up these pillars so that they can, at some point when they're wandering again and they see the pillar, they say, oh, we set that up at that point in our tribe's history. We did that then. And remember, we got through it. And so they'll set up a new one to remember the new place they're in. Memorials are there for a reason. Stanford University, they did a whole study on the importance of memorials, remembering. And what they noticed with people is this: people who took memorials, remembering seriously, people that had in place something that they would go to, or statues or different things that they would memorialize. Here's what happens to people in a deeper, profound way. What they found with people is, number one, people who oftentimes benefit from memorials, you'll find is memorials create safe space for people to visit and reflect. And so this idea of memorial, and you could go even deeper than just the stone statue, right? It could be something as simple as like ritual, right? You have the thing set up, and every year you know that Christmas time, right? Thanksgiving time, whatever it is, there is a memorial, a safe space set up for you and the family to come together, and there's safe space for you. Yeah. Number two, it helps steer people towards something positive. And I really appreciate this one. We set memorials, we set remembrance days, we set remembrance moments and events. We do this, and what it does is it creates positivity. We get these really good endorphins moving, right? Positivity, it's created when we take time to remember. Yeah. Sometimes it's really heartfelt and anguished, and there's some tears shed. Other times there's joy, there's celebration, but all of it brings in some kind of positive element. That's what Stanford has said in their research. And lastly, it brings feelings of unity and purpose. Oftentimes, when we go to these celebrations, these events, these memorial services, people who gather together, there is a purpose behind it. And oftentimes it will create a beautiful sense of unity, connection, safe space. And so the word here, remember, I find it really interesting. The word here is zakar. And for the Hebrews, this is really fascinating to me. Rabbi Rashi, he says, zakar is to say, is to hear the divine say, I have not forgotten your pain. Right? Remember, I have not forgotten your pain. Sometimes, here's the thing, sometimes we need acknowledgement from people, right? We need acknowledgement of like the pain that we've gone through. We need someone to say, hey, I recognize you've been through it this week. Maybe not always the people who say, oh, I totally understand, because oftentimes they don't, right? But the beautiful gift someone can give you is to simply say, I acknowledge, I see that you have been through so much frustrating, difficulty, pain, brokenness this week. I acknowledge that. I see it. That is one of the concepts behind this word, zakar. Going even deeper, when God remembers for Israel, when the word remember, acknowledge, right? Whenever this word comes up, here's what almost always follows. And again, this goes along deeply with the idea of Sabbath, right? Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And so zakar, what always follows with remember, is change, healing, restoration. Change, healing, restoration. The Jewish word, the phrase here, is tikkun olam. It's when everything is brought back in order. Everything has a purpose, a connection. There is restoration to be had. And it starts when God says, I remember. Now, for many of us right now during this Christmas season, there's a group, again, Jewish people. What they do is they don't celebrate Christmas. I don't know if you're aware of that. They are not super angry when they see Starbucks with red cups. That's not going on. They are celebrating something different. And truth be told, they've been celebrating it for a very, very long time. Even truth be told, in the first century, you can see Hanukkah, the celebration of the candle, the lighting of the menorah. You will see this even in the New Testament for Christians. But here's Hanukkah. Hanukkah is this celebration, this tradition of remembering. It's this tradition that, again, Jews take time, and it's super vital for their survival. And so one writer says this about Hanukkah. At what is the coldest, darkest time of the year for many people, we celebrate by bringing light and warmth into our homes, into our communities, and into the world around us. This is one of the reasons I really like Christmas, actually. A lot of people will say, oh, this is like bringing in the Christmas tree and the wreaths and all that. That's pagan. Well, yeah, there's some interesting traditions in the past with it, but here's why they would bring wreaths and trees, evergreens into the home in the first place. Before we had Santa Claus and reindeer and all that stuff, here's what they would do. Again, a tradition that was far older, right, than the first century time of Jesus, right? What these people would do when they would do Yule tide and all of that, they would bring in evergreens to remind them in the middle of the winter, life is going to spring up again. Every season has a promise with it, doesn't it? There is the promise that spring will come again because it is the natural order of life. Summer is going to happen. Now, is summer going to be super hot this year or mild or whatever? We don't know, but we know that we live in a world where there are seasonal cycles. And there's the promise that warmth and connection can be found. And so what they do is they bring that warmth, that connection, that promise inside the home to celebrate the light and the warmth that there is. And it's beautiful. And the Jewish people have been doing this since that first century, and it's a really beautiful tradition. Another writer says this: there is the public proclamation of the miraculous events that transpired in the days of the Maccabees. We remember the family of 5 sons who led the revolt against the Hellenization, again, assimilation basically, of Jerusalem, and became the heroes of the Hanukkah story. When all hope seemed lost, their candles still shone light, and we must do the same. I think this is so good, right? Again, they will light the candles on the menorah. They'll sing different songs. They'll recite the stories of these 5 sons, right, who led this revolt. Who, when in the morning they looked and they saw, right, in the early morning the candles are still lit. There's still hope. That is the deep idea, the promise. They're holding on to the promise that our people will make it through. It's a beautiful celebration. And get this, we're not even done yet with this verse, right? This set of verses, because it continues. It says, God caused a spirit to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. And the springs of the deep were closed, and the windows of the heavens and the rain from the heavens were withheld. As you read through the rest of this, you'll see it's all about reconciliation. It's all about restoration. You even have the idea here, 40 days, right? Where things are beginning to be flipped upside down, turned around, learned, unlearned. It's beautiful. It's the time when we experience healing. And in the midst of it, there must be time to remember the story, time to remember the moments of the promise that God has given us. We will make it through. I have a friend, he's a little bit older, and he has this tradition every year. He goes to the grave of his father every single year. And he tells me, he said, I just sit there and I talk to Dad. And I'm kind of like, yeah, I get that we have a different view of like what happens when you die and all of that. But I was like, does he answer you back? What happens here is, well, no, Tony, don't be silly. But he said for him, he goes to his dad's grave every year at his dad's birthday. He goes there every year because he wants to remember the stories. He wants to remember the experiences, the hikes. He wants to remember the times when Dad taught him how to ride a bike, how to tie his shoe. He remembers these moments, and sometimes he says he'll be there for hours, just sitting there, thinking back, celebrating, remembering his dad. Because it is so important to remember. Acknowledge the life that passed. Acknowledge the life we have. Acknowledge the promise that life is about to spring up again. Acknowledge the things, the promises. Taking time to acknowledge those things, remember those things, is deeply part of life. I think sometimes we get so caught up in everyday life, everyday routines. We get so busy that we don't often stop to remember. And so Israel's God stops, acknowledges the pain, acknowledges the brokenness, and says, I feel your pain. I see it, and I remember my promise. You are not alone, and you will get through this too. It's beautiful. Isn't this a great book? Yeah. So what do we do? How do we remember? I've been reading these interesting books about how to essentially apply a lot of these concepts today in visual ways, as well as using all the different experiences we have within us, right? Sight, feel, all of those, touch. And so what I want to do with you is really pretty simple. I want you to think about remembering in this way. Number one, seeing. When you want to remember, recall, acknowledge certain things in the past, take time to consider your own journey, right? Number one, what if you involved all your senses? Or at least most of them. Number one, scene. Take time to view the images that kind of correspond with moments of like triumph, defeat, pain. And this is what I mean. It's something as simple as this. Many of us, we have our iPhones, right? We'll take our iPhones out. You have taken so many thousands of pictures on this thing. Am I right? Like thousands of them. When's the last time you just opened up your iPhone and you looked at some of those pictures? Like, what if you scrolled back 5 years ago and you just started looking through some of those pictures? You took time to remember. Because what we found over and over again, psychologically, what that does for us is we actually gain a deeper appreciation from where we've been, but also for the moment we have now. Take time visually remembering. Another thing you can do is saying. And I like this idea of hearing yourself, but also saying things out loud, right? Read some of your favorite poems. Some of you have some, or quotes, or stories, right? Read these things aloud. The idea is to hear your voice, right? Listen to your voice. Hear yourself saying certain words, phrases. Read letters that were so important to you back then, that meant a great deal to you. Remember some of those things by saying them out loud. Just saying them out loud will bring things to life. It's no wonder that the Hebrews use this whole analogy. God spoke it into existence. Because again, I believe we speak things into existence, right? If I speak life into other people, I will see their positivity change, right? They will become more positive, happier people. I speak it into existence. The idea of speaking is so important when we remember. Another idea is hearing. And I think this is a fabulous idea. It sounds kind of corny, but here's what I mean. When you hear certain things, you will oftentimes have memories. And that's why oftentimes when you're driving down the road, you will hear a song and you'll say, "Oh, I remember this song. This was the song that I met my wife on and we had this long dance," or whatever it was. Hearing certain things will often cause us to remember. And so why not go back and read some of these pieces you've listened to before? Why not go back, listen to the songs, the stories? You might even have audio recordings of people saying certain things or whatever. Listening is really an important part of remembering. And then lastly, touch, taste, feel. This is kind of a different one, right? But I want you to think about it. This one, according to psychologists, is really important. And this is where like the touch thing, getting the hug. When's the last time you held your partner's hand? Right? Some of us will give them 3 little squeezes, and you know what that means, right? I love you, right? Or get the remote. Touch, feel. That's what it feels like to be in community. You're in connection. You're feeling another human being close to you. And the taste idea, no wonder Jewish people are always eating every time they're together. Whenever there's a big feast, right? When I have turkey and mashed potatoes, I will immediately think of Thanksgiving. Yeah, because those things are always connected. And so when you want to remember certain things, you want to memorialize, you want to celebrate, oftentimes these different elements are going to be connected to it. And why not use them all when you're wanting to go back and think and memorialize? Remember when we first bought our house? Remember when we first met? Remember that first job I had? Those kind of things oftentimes will remind us of where we've been and cause us to appreciate where we are now, knowing that the promise is there that new life will begin again. Spring will come again, and there'll be new challenges, new mountains for you to climb. It's beautiful. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. As always, please consider going to ethos-church.org/donate, especially here at the end of the year. End of the year giving is so helpful for us. So please consider giving, contributing these tax-deductible donations. They're super helpful with sharing these messages, continuing our Ethos living room sessions every month, and then keeping our YouTube channel going. We appreciate everyone being a part of this. And so, as always, everyone, thank you so much for being here. We love you, and we'll see you next week.